Right. So thanks everyone for being on today. Happy International Women's Day. My name's KB. I work for GDI as the community director. And because we have a lot of folks here from a lot of different organizations, and again, hopefully a lot of people watching our live stream, I want to share a little bit more about what GDI is, what it is that we do, and really what we're excited to share today. So if you're new to GDI, welcome. We are very excited that you are here. Today's panel is really going to introduce you to all the excitement that is learning and loving OSS, or open source software. At GDI, our entire goal is to offer events like this, either affordable classes, hands-on workshops, labs, panel discussions such as this, all with the goal of making tech accessible, because we do believe in a world where everyone is involved in the development of tech and really creating the future of tech. And we can't really have an accessible and inclusive technology without everyone having a seat at the table. So that's why GDI is committed to creating those welcoming, supportive opportunities for women and non-binary adults specifically to learn these software development skills. And really, at the end of the day, we want everyone to develop code, confidence, and community. While we're talking about OSS and a lot of programming languages, front end, all sorts of different specialties that we offer through our virtual classes at GDI, the real main goal is to create that community and build that confidence, because we know that especially if you're new, getting involved in learning tech can be incredibly intimidating. And without a community to lean on or learn from, it can be even more isolating. And really, that is how you build the confidence, knowing that you have a group of people that are there to support you and cheer you on. And that's really what we're all about here at GDI. So today's panel is going to be informal and fun, just like all of our other events. So we do invite you to ask questions. For those of you that are joining us on Zoom, we have a chat function. Myself and our executive director here at GDI, Katie Franco, will be moderating the chat. We can make sure those questions are brought forward to our facilitator, Jessica Vaughn, who will be leading today's conversation. And we're going to talk about open source, what it is, how to understand it, how to feel comfortable with it, and how it really is going to help you in your own career, and talk about some really awesome opportunities that you yourself can join through some workshops, labs, and actually a mini hackathon at the end of the month that will have you contributing some open source software to a web platform for Lasagna Love, which is a nonprofit that GDI is really excited to partner with, all about community building, addressing those community needs and food insecurity, with a global nonprofit of providing really acts of kindness through serving lasagna. So we've got a couple folks on from Lasagna Love that will share a little bit more about their own experience, and Jessica will walk us through exactly what we're going to look forward to this month, this whole Women's Month, as we really dig into open source. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Jessica to introduce our panelists and get the conversation started. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Katie, also affectionately known as KB, as we have two KBs, of course. I'm Jessica, and I have quite a long history with the girl development now. At this point, more years than it seems natural to say. I started out as a teaching assistant and also taking classes to girl development when I was first starting out as a developer. Have been a chapter leader and instructor, and am currently on the board and a subject matter expert with the organization. And it's my pleasure to always be able to bring opportunities like this to the community. I'm very passionate about it, so I'm really excited about what we have for March. And so of course, now you've heard some great things about just GDI as an organization. And today we want to focus on open source software. And there's a few things that we've been thinking about, what is open source software? Really, I think a lot of people get started and probably use open source software, but maybe, don't actually know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, what makes something open source, what does that even mean? What is it like to get involved if you want to be a contributor to open source? And also, what may be some of the issues that you will have to overcome if you've tried to get into open source before. And so we have this, thoughts in mind of how we can introduce this to our community and how we can make sure that we have opportunities for folks to get involved. And so that is where our partnership with Lasagna Love comes in, which is amazing. And so not only do you have some amazing panelists today, but also some folks that are working with this project. And when we get to the end of our session today, we are going to talk about what are next steps for our March series and how you as an individual can get involved with an open source project and being a new contributor to an open source project. So everything is really designed to come full circle. So I, again, am happy to be able to host this for everyone and be a resource in that way. And we have great panelists with us today. So we're going to just start out with some brief introductions. I will go through some different questions with the panelists. And if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to throw those in the chat as we're going. I may pick up some of those questions as we go along, but we will also have a little time for Q&A at the end as well. So again, feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat in real time. And that's here in our meeting room. If we have LinkedIn, I think maybe someone else can help us field those questions. And we'll try to get all of those answered either in real time or at the end when we have our Q&A session. And then, as I mentioned, we will wrap up today with talking about how you can actually get involved with the Lasagna Love project. So that being said, my long spiel out of the way, let's have our panelists introduce themselves. And it would be really helpful just to hear from you all about, what your background is, how you got into tech or dev, TLDR on how you got into dev. If you have experience with open source software, how you might have gotten started with that. And then what you're currently doing now, whether it's on the Lasagna Love project or something else. So we have Amy, Emma, and Erin here with us today. So let's start out with Amy. Do you want to give us your introduction?
Sure. Hello, my name is Amy Lieberman. I am currently a software engineer at Panorama Education in Boston, and I'm also a volunteer developer with Lasagna Love, which was mentioned as a not-for-profit that matches volunteers with neighbors to bake and deliver a lasagna, no questions asked, as an act of kindness. I began my career originally as a middle school math teacher, got kind of roped into teaching some coding classes and was like, this is pretty cool, and found a lot of interest there and have kind of always had interest for a lot of the underlying concepts and skills that are beneficial as a developer. I ended up doing a boot camp and I have been working as a software engineer since. I've primarily worked in Ruby on Rails with JavaScript with various different frameworks in the front end. And that's kind of the journey, I guess, that I've been on as a developer. A little bit with open source, I just kind of had stumbled into it when working on a project and then started hearing about it more and more and kind of looked into how open source works. It's just been kind of a great opportunity without a lot of gatekeeping or limiting to really get to use and contribute to software that is used really widely. So that's kind of been what my experience has been with it. And it's been kind of a new opportunity to also step up. I think also when I was a newer developer, it can feel intimidating at first, definitely in many ways. But I think I pretty quickly learned that everybody is kind of in the same boat in learning as they go every single day in many ways. And it's been a really great community for that as well in my experience.
Awesome, thank you, Amy. And of course, we are going to dive deeper into some of those other topics as well. So Emma, do you want to give your introduction?
Yes, my name is Emma. I'm in the Boston area currently. I actually started and got out into tech. I used to be a criminologist. I was doing studies in actually Scandinavia and in the Pennsylvania region. And I took some coding courses, and when I graduated from my program, I actually kind of fell into a junior DevOps role as a contractor for the Air Force. And so since then, I have migrated into more of a technical key lead, so I can do product, project, or program management from any level. And I currently work at Drizzly, which is an alcohol delivery service, brings you alcohol from the liquor store to your door. I have not participated too widely in open source projects, which is why this one set up with Lasagna Love has really piqued my interest. My contributions so far have been, just poking at little things and submitting fixes within GitHub to other things that we're using here at Drizzly or we have used at the Air Force. And it definitely broke down that imposter syndrome wall for me of I don't know what I'm doing, and it helped me collaborate with people across the world.
Awesome. I think, people always talk about imposter syndrome and having imposter syndrome, but it's already, I'm hearing that open source has been a way to overcome that. So we can explore that further as well. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Erin. Do you want to give everyone an introduction?
Sure. I'm Erin Peterson. I've been a CTO and a CPO. I've been a product person. I've been a developer. I took my first class with GDI in January 2011, and I and I joined the board also Q1 2011. So I've been with GDI for quite a while. I've been involved in open source since 2008, 2009. And when I was first doing it, I was working at Microsoft, and I was put on a research project to figure out how we could use open source more effectively within Microsoft. And then later on, I was tapped to run Microsoft's open source foundation. So I started doing that in 2013, 2015, I believe it was 2015. And since then, I've stayed involved in the open source community. One of the things that is really interesting to me and exciting about this particular opportunity between GDI and Lasagna Love is that Lasagna Love is starting this project completely from scratch. And so it's a very rare opportunity to see what a project looks like on the days that it starts. So anybody who's ever been in a startup knows that a startup looks very different than a big company. And it can be really intimidating to walk into a project that's already underway. I mean, people are already nervous, already have imposter syndrome. And this is a really great opportunity both to see a project get underway and also for us to just set in and cement that culture early on of all contributions are valued, all contributors are valued, and really, really build that into the culture and that project from day one. So I'm very excited about this. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Yes, I'm so excited. Erin and I got to have a conversation, also both fellow board members with Girl Develop It, and this just was like perfect timing and everything. So I think this is just like, I don't know what they say, there's a good word for it that's like a buzzword. It's not coming to me now. But I think that everything, like the stars are aligning for us, and I will give a brief introduction for myself. Again, I'm Jessica Vaughn, and I am a software engineer. I also am a bootcamp instructor and a coding instructor, and I have pretty much always been an instructor almost my entire journey as a software engineer, which started out with some freelancing back in probably like 2014 or 2015, front-end development, and really it was taking classes with Girl Develop It when I was early on, being a TA with Girl Develop It as well, which helped build my my confidence as a developer. And then I have worked within, different areas, freelancing, full-time engineering, and I have taught for full-time boot camps and part-time programs, GDI and other nonprofits and things of that nature as well. And I think when I first got started, it was like, hey, one of the great things you could do, like literally my first tech conference was like, hey, contribute to an open source project. And that sounded like so easy and so awesome. And then I went to contribute to exorcism.io, which some people may or may not be familiar with. Not exorcism like poltergeist, but exorcism as an exercises, like, programming exercises. So that was my first open source contribution, but it was interesting because it was like, I had the programming chops, I would say, but the projects, when you get to a project, usually like, it's like you just joined a big company. You have this huge code base in front of you, except you don't have like necessarily the engineering team sitting alongside you to figure out how to navigate through that. And so that was very interesting, and I was supported by the folks that are contributors there. But I imagine I've seen a lot of times where you might get started in open source and just kind of be overwhelmed with what you should do. So I want to start out first and think about, what is the actual definition? And then I'll have you all kind of describe to me, what is open source and what does it mean to you? So when you want to go for like a raw definition, we would say that open source is software where the original source code is made freely available. It can be redistributed and it can be modified, right? So that's just like a bare bones explanation of open source. But if you all want to give some thoughts on this, what is open source and what does it mean to you? I can take your unmutes as ideas of how to circle about, or I can call out on folks. Okay, Erin, how about it? Do you want to give us some thoughts?
Sure. And hopefully you can hear me. I was just
Yes,
taking.
very well.
I think that open source literally ties to the license, right? If you have an open source license on your project, theoretically you're open source. And I think that turns out to be a small component. I think for a lot of people, when they think of open source, they think about being part of a really big or even small, but being part of a community that's contributing to a common code base and a common project. And in this case, what we've really focused on is building that sense of community. From the very first conversation, Jessica, that you and I had about this, it's really been about how do we foster that sense of community. And one of the things that really has been informing how we're thinking about this as an open source project and how we value contributors is watching the layoffs that have rolled through a lot of the big FANG companies in the last 3-4 months or so. And the hardest part about a layoff is that you have access to your systems cut off, you have access to your co-contributors cut off. And so building and thinking about that sense of community first and making sure that people know that, once you find your footing in this community, and we're making it really easy to find your footing, you're part of that community. And so the open part of open source in that regard really becomes about the open community and the open engagement, the open acceptance of contributors and contributions, and up and down the stack, right? And throughout the skill sets required. I think probably everybody on this call knows that if you want to bring something to market, or if you want users to use something, it's not just about writing the code, right? You need product people, and you need designers, and you need data people, and you need infrastructure people, and you need developers, and you need developer tools. And we're building out roles for all of those people in our community and around this open project.
I think that's a great overview, and also why we are definitely excited to work with Lasagna Love, and would love to see Amy or Emma. Do you have any things that you would add on to that conversation? How about Amy?
I think that Erin touched on a good point in terms of kind of the community that can exist around open source projects. And I think that you have to be very intentional sometimes in terms of how that's crafted. I think that, I know I've participated in open source projects where that did not exist, and I've also participated in ones where it has. And I think that that can vary a lot by project, and also in terms of, when people are communicating about whether it's like an issue that's filed or whatever it may be. I think that there are very different approaches to that. And I'll echo what Erin said as well about how I'm really excited about this Lasagna Love project that's going to be open source, because I think that Lasagna Love as an organization has a super strong community already existing, and a really active volunteer group. And so I think just kind of you're kind of almost getting absorbed into an already existing community and already existing kind of almost like standards for how we're interacting with one another. And I think that those pieces of communication are all really important. And I think it really sets us up for success with this project, with this opportunity to kind of build upon that already existing community, and really be able to build something that I think can be really special here in terms of having this open source project.
I want to circle back to that later, because this is maybe different than some projects, because you all already have an existing project and now you're starting something open source, an existing community, versus if it's a community that's spinning up from the ground up, a project that's spinning up from the ground up. community and everything is all brand new to them. So I kind of have a note to, a pin in that. And Emma, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that point?
Yeah, so open source to me also means that you can come from any background, you can come from any skill set, and you can get feedback from people who've been in the industry for years. You can get people who have just submitted their first PR immediately. And it's really good to have that well-rounded view in open source projects. Sometimes if you have too many people with the same backgrounds or the same skill sets, you can kind of go into a little bit of a rabbit hole there. And you have to be able to pull yourself out, and open source projects such as the one that's happening with Lasagna Love is definitely going to be super diverse, which I'm super excited about.
Definitely. Okay, cool. So now the question I have for you all is, how did you get involved in your first open source project? So maybe, what was it like for you, and were there any parts that surprised you?
I can go first.
Okay, go ahead.
My first open source project that I was involved in, it was with a security scanner. So we were trying to use it for the government, and there were so many issues wrong with it. We kept running into small little bugs that were like completely blocking how we could deploy the software. And so we said, do you know what, instead of just trying to figure it out ourselves, let's start collaborating, let's start communicating and contributing to their open source projects. And it ended up unblocking us so much faster, which was super fun. We actually then in turn made a ton of contacts at that company, and they ended up helping us out anytime that we got blocked. So it was a really cool way to branch out our network, but also unblock ourselves.
Awesome. Okay, I know Aaron was tinkering on and Amy, do either of you want to jump in next?
Sure. My first open source project was in 2007 and 2008. So, to just set, everybody's memory there, this was when AIM and email and listservs were basically the ways to communicate, no Slack, no Mattermost. And the thing that surprised me the most is that if you were willing to show up and you were willing to make a contribution, however imperfect it was, or however new you were to the industry, that the other people on the listservs, the other people in the email aliases, no matter how senior they were, took you seriously. And I remember there was one person in particular, Jim Jagielski. He helped found Apache. He's, I believe, on the OSI board right now. And I was so completely intimidated by the idea of talking to him. And he just turned out to be great. He's still, I consider him to be a mentor, but just the access to people within these open source communities, and the idea that, I could talk to these amazing world-class engineers and get help and see their work up front, see how they thought about problems and solve them, was just really cool.
And with that, was that a project that, it was internal or external?
That was, and then when I went on to Outer Curve, because it was Microsoft, there was, I think, 20 something projects in the foundation when I became its executive director. And so then I got to see a lot of different projects up close. And that was really cool too. Then you get to see whole other aspects because then you get to see how different communities work. Like up until then, I'd only contributed to one. I'm like, oh, this is what open source looks like. And I'm like, oh, wow, no. Open source projects are just like companies or teams. They all have their own little microclimates, their own little microcultures. And that was a really big surprise too. So then I'm like, oh no, it's a matter of figuring out like which culture fits you, which projects you're excited about.
So Amy, did you have any story to share there as well?
Yeah, my first experience was similar a bit to what Emma described, where for me, at least, like at the beginning, I had been told like open source projects are great. You should contribute to open source projects. And it was intimidating. And so I didn't. And it took a little bit of time until I was like, okay, there's an issue with this project that I'm using, even though I'm not actively contributing to it at the moment. And I kind of know that I need to file an issue on GitHub, but I was just very hesitant to do so. And it took encouragement of another developer to whom I brought up this kind of thing I noticed. And also, I think I at the time felt like I needed a little affirmation of like, okay, what I found actually is something that's worth bringing up. But then I was really surprised to find, as Erin's mentioned as well, how once I did bring something up, it was like people are tossing in ideas and it is kind of this collaborative process. And I think I had this preconceived notion that I needed to come in with a well-baked solution to whatever I was trying to work on before I contribute anything. But that really wasn't the case in my experience, but rather it was completely fine to say, I think that this needs to be done this way. And then people were like, oh, great point with that. But also here's this other way that I would consider doing this. And there was just a ton of really great collaboration that happened. And to me, it's similar to the experiences I've had at work, which is great. But I somehow felt like just putting something out there on the internet was not going, that it would not be that same type of environment. But in my experience, it really was. And so I think kind of just taking that first step with the first project can feel big. But even if it's a small contribution to start, I think that's like a way to kind of ease in, dip your toes in, and see kind of what that experience is like of contributing to an open source project.
It's scary.
Yeah.
The first, it is so scary. The first time you walk in, it's like the first time you walk into a project or that digital realm and you're trying to communicate with these people, it's sort of like, walking into a bar in the Wild West in 1886, you just sort of steel yourself. And I hope everybody understands that, we're talking from the perspective of people who have been involved in these communities for a while, but I think we all have a deep empathy and sharp memory of how hard it is to raise your hand and join the first time.
I was even gonna say that one of the common threads that was brought up too is sometimes when you're first going to use an open source project, I found sometimes, especially since I teach a lot of folks that are new into tech, you run into this issue where it's like, wait, the thing that I'm using doesn't work, or there's like a bug and I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. And even you take on the pain and ownership of something not working and not realizing that, it's basically an upstream problem, but there's ways to go about it, right? So feeling comfortable to, first of all, seek out that open source project. Usually those might be hosted on GitHub. Go into the issues, search through the issues to see if you find maybe a solution for something, or maybe it is the first time that it will be being logged and feeling comfortable to, log an issue and have that conversation. So I don't know if you all have any other thoughts about that, but I think that's probably the first thing that I try to point out to folks that I know are using open source software for the first time. Like, hey, it's okay. Maybe the bug that you're experiencing is not you, but we should let the team who builds this know, so that way they can start to work on something for us. Or like you said, it could be a gateway for you to actually contribute back to that project. So
Mozilla has an excellent list of bugs and bugs with mentors. So there are specific bugs that people have raised their hand and said, hey, I'll sign up to mentor someone to try and help fix this. And I think that is just there might be other open source projects that are doing that too, but in particular, Mozilla's approach there is really strong.
I feel like people know, or maybe people hear about Mozilla like as one of those big, great like open source projects as well. So highly recommend. There's definitely a lot of tools that we use, but then there's certain communities, and maybe we can come up with some resources after this conversation that we have that we could share. Maybe on a blog or something about like what are the different ways and resources that you all could get involved outside of just contributing to those projects. I know like during, I think it has to be October, we usually have the big, what is the big hackathon, like open source events that we have in November? I'm gonna look it up and come back to y'all. It's that's one good way to get involved as well. So I'm going to bring that back. But I want to jump into yes, Hacktober. Thank you, Gloria. Hacktoberfest in Hacktober, which is also an amazing opportunity where basically not only can people go ahead and get involved in open source, but like you mentioned, Erin, they the contribution, like in order to know how you can contribute, usually tags are used, right? That you might have like a good first contribution or good first bug tags and things like that that you can look for in the projects, so you can kind of know what might be a good thing to to like step into, because there's different degrees of difficulty and commitment when it comes to certain bugs that you might take on. So we talked about it a little bit, but what do you all feel like could be the different benefits of contributing to open source, and maybe even some of the difficulties when you're first starting out as a contributor?
I think some of the benefits can be just growing your skill set. You are gaining experience, first of all, walking into a code base that you might not have familiarity with, which is a skill that is needed. This is also, I'm also saying this from the perspective of a developer, but of course there are lots of roles that are involved very often in open source projects, whether that's project managers or just there's a lot of different roles out there that could be relevant for different projects. But I think that you kind of get that experience of walking into a project that you may not have familiarity with off the bat and familiarizing yourself with it. You can just kind of expand your technical expertise in those ways, but also you learn to work with a lot of different people, which is also a very valuable skill in a lot of ways. And then also kind of, I feel like we've talked about it a lot, but kind of going back to whether it's feeling imposter syndrome or feeling just that hesitation at the beginning to get involved. I think experience with that is also extremely valuable, of pushing yourself if that isn't something that's particularly within your comfort zone. I think the more that you do it, the less intimidating it feels, whatever the situation may be. And so I think it's very valuable just from that like very personal skill level, as well, of being able to try something new, put yourself out there, interact with these other people, and also you benefit from the skills, whether technical or not, that other folks have, and being able to interact with those people. I think there's so much that you can learn from that. Not exactly open source in how we've done in the past, but I will say with Lasagna Love, there are other developers who I've worked with there, and I've learned a lot through that experience and grown. And I think with open source, that's just kind of expanding that network that you're working with, and it can really push yourself in a really positive way through engaging in those networks.
Emma or Erin, did either of you want to chime in on that one?
Go ahead, Emma. I feel like I keep talking first.
No, I saw that you had unmuted first, so I didn't know if you wanted to go first.
I think Erin's staying unmuted.
Okay, that's good to know. Some of the benefits that I found with contributing to open source is similar to what Amy said, with you're diving into a brand new code base. It can be kind of intimidating. Actually, no, it can be extremely intimidating, whether you're just diving into an open source project or you are starting a new job. And 2 years ago, I actually did start a new job, and it did actually prepare me for all of those skills of jumping into a new code base, trying to figure out the process for submitting bugs and fixing things on the fly. And it gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of skill that I didn't know I needed before moving on to my next job, which was awesome.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think for a lot of people, particularly if you're a junior in your career, or if you've learned to code in code classes or boot camps, or you've gotten a comp sci degree, you know how to code and you understand the fundamentals, but there's knowing how to code, and then there's being part of an engineering team, and then there's being part of an engineering team that has shipped a product that people are using. And those are three very different things. And one of the things about open source projects is that they give you the opportunity to understand what it is to be part of a team. You know, it takes many people to get a product or a project out the door. It takes somebody to make a pull request. It takes somebody to respond to a pull request, right? It takes somebody to report a bug. It takes somebody to respond to the bug. It takes somebody to set up the place to report those bugs and respond to those bugs and track those bugs. And an open source project, you have the opportunity to see that oftentimes in a way that you don't necessarily get to see it in a day job, if that's your job. And if it's new for you, coding's new for you, or product management or design is new for you, it's an opportunity to see up front what that process looks like. And it's also an opportunity to stretch and figure out, is there another aspect of software development that I really like to do? I've talked to a lot of engineers who say, hey, I'd really like to try product management, or product people who say, hey, I'd really like to try being a data analyst for a bit. And open source projects and volunteer projects like this are an excellent opportunity to be able to stretch in a really low penalty, low friction kind of way.
So what I thought about as you all were talking is, when I did my first contribution, like I was mentioning, exorcism.io, I think that was my first time. I found that it was sobering. It was like, I felt that when I had my contribution, the credibility that I felt and the credibility, just to, my resume, my portfolio skills, a lot of my projects were personal projects. So that was the first thing that, like you said, was live and it was deployed and it's in production. But it was interesting because I thought, I had Git figured out. And I was very early on, right? And so even with those layers you're talking about, Erin, there's, say you're working with version control, right? There's that layer of like, I have my own individual projects, and then I have team projects that I have direct access to. And then I have somebody else's repository that I am not allowed to contribute to directly. And so I found myself in this weird loophole where they're like, yeah, you got to rebase all the changes back in, and then your PR will be good to go. We're gonna merge it. I'm like, what is a rebase? And it was great because I did have some awesome contributors that helped me through that process, but I just kept going through this weird loop where I was not, quite getting it down. And so even that is, like I said, it was sobering for me, but not in a bad way. It showed me, not just the technical side as far as like maybe a different area I wanted to branch out into, but it showed me different areas where I could level up my skills as a software engineer. And what does it take to, again, like you said, be on these projects that are deployed and in production, and there's different skill sets that goes along with it. So, there's layers to it. And I think what we tried to do this month as well is figure out how can we support our members before you want to go ahead and get involved in the project. How can we help you level up your skills so you will have the support that you need and not run into similar issues that we may have run into. You may still run into issues and we'll be there to support you, but we can kind of, we don't have to run into things that other people have already been through before. That's kind of my thought always. So I do want to take some time now to talk about Lasagna Love itself, and then maybe take a couple questions if you all have any in the chat. Again, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chats. And I do have the LinkedIn chat up as well. I can see LinkedIn and I can see Zoom. If there's any questions you all have for the panelists. But I would love to, since we do have folks that are actually, I think everybody here is involved in the project. Did anybody want to give like an overview of Lasagna Love? I think Amy gave like a quick little, a great like one-liner, but you all may have something a little more official.
I can add to what I said before, if that works. Sure. So Lasagna Love is a not-for-profit that has had a really great community impact. We have a zero judgment approach to feeding families, and spreading kindness is also at our core in a lot of ways by delivering meals to those who request it. And so far we've fed 1.3 million people in under 3 years. And we have volunteers in all 50 states, as well as in Canada and Australia as well. And technology has just been really central to our growth and innovation in so many ways, and our ability to reach so many people. And we have a volunteer portal that we use as a tool that has really helped our reach get so far. and just really impact so many people. And there's also just a really vibrant volunteer community, mostly of people who are like the volunteers cooking meals, but people who are involved in the organization in all sorts of ways. And the community is really strong, engaged, and supportive. And then we've had this existing portal, and we are working on a new project, which will be open source. I don't know if Erin was going to talk about that or if I should. Okay, but we're calling it Project Ricotta, and it's to build a portal that meets our needs as we are growing, and just kind of to meet our tech needs as an organization as we're growing from here. And it's going to be an open source project, which is just a really cool opportunity, I think, to contribute to a cutting edge nonprofit that really just works to power kindness around the world in a lot of ways. And the folks who are involved with it is just, I'm a little biased, but I think it's a really great group of people who are just really passionate about everything that the organization does. And so we would love to get more people involved in the project. That's the hope here, is that we want people to get involved in this open source project. And as Erin said, to kind of like really see it grow from the ground up. And I think it's a really great opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Amy. I was like, everybody here has like great experience with Lasagna Love, so I'll let you all do the overview. And there's a couple points I wanted to, cover for folks that are listening before we get into some Q&A, if there's any, and then we can talk about what's the next steps for folks this month. So the main things I kind of want to get to out of this is, what do you think the open source project will bring or contribute to the Lasagna Love organization? I would definitely love to hear from you all, and especially, Erin, knowing that you are thinking about like the overall technical team as well, and you all have different areas in which you're contributing to the project. I think you all might have different insights on, what open source is going to mean for Lasagna Love.
The project itself for Lasagna Love, I think Amy touched on it really well. Lasagna Love, which I also just love to death. There's nothing more fun than making and giving away lasagnas other than making and receiving a lasagna. The organization didn't exist 3 years ago. It has already served 1.3 million people, which is amazing. The tool set that was built to connect those early people who raised their hands and said, hey, I'd love a lasagna, with the chefs, the people who said, hey, I can make a lasagna this weekend. Those tools are at capacity. And so now new tools are being built from scratch. So there's a few really interesting problems that are coming up for the organization. One is, how do we go ahead and build that matching engine so that the recipients and the chefs are matched with as little friction as possible? And, that's an engineering problem in and of itself. How do you think about schedules, and how do you think about geographic constraints, et cetera? So we're building the matching engine. There's a really interesting problem that Lasagna Love has run into over the last year and a half, which is that more people have raised their hands and said, hey, I'd love to make a lasagna, than have raised their hands at times and said, hey, I'd really love a lasagna. And so how do you build the tool set? How do you engineer a product experience so that people are not shy about raising their hands and saying, hey, I'd really love a lasagna? Because we've got all these people over here who really want to make lasagnas for other people. So how do you build that product experience? And then I think that's a really interesting product design and engineering project to solve. And then I think there's some really interesting infrastructure challenges around how do you set this up? How do you set up secure, reliable, resilient systems? And then how do you build an organization that is a combination of open source volunteer contributors and paid contributors to support operating this system and being responsive to it? So there's a whole set of software project management problems there too. And then we'd also like to potentially tackle the donation problem and the donor problem. The shift in social media engagement over the last couple of years has really changed the landscape for how donors find out about organizations they can donate cash to, and how relatively easy or how relatively difficult it has been to make cash donations. And that's a problem that's affecting Lasagna Love. It's a problem that's affecting all nonprofits. And so one of the things we've sort of thought about is, if we have the resources or the people who like to work on that, that's an interesting problem to tackle too. But I'd say in order, the problems are the matching engine, the product experience, and then the reliable, secure infrastructure. Amy, did you want to add anything? Or Emma, did you want to add anything there?
No, I think you did a perfect job of the overview.
Agreed.
Awesome. So, how can contributors get involved in the project in the short term and also in the long term, right? Because of course we're going to host an event this month, but an open source project is something that you can grow with and learn with. So I definitely want to take both of those timelines, I guess you could say, so to speak, into consideration.
Emma, do you want to tackle that one?
Yes. So this is actually a really good question on how to get involved. We did have a sign up sheet, and I think a majority of the people here have already done it. And that's how you may have gotten the invite for this meeting. What we plan to do now, we're still kind of in the phase where I think I just set up the GitHub repo that we will be using yesterday. So we're very, very much in the new stages and trying to figure out what we're doing. And so sign up through that link. You'll be added to the Slack channels, the appropriate GitHub repos. Something super cool about that is we'll also be using Jira in order to track all of the tickets and all of the work. That's something that's commonly used. I hate saying industry standard, but it's the only term I can think of right now. So even just getting involved from that ticketing side and road mapping side will totally help teach new skills and learn new skills for everyone involved.
I love hearing that because, you know, one thing I did want to highlight is, so there's different people, right? You could already have experience, and maybe this is a project that, you know, like for me, I teach mostly now, and I like to do live streams and podcasts and all this other kind of stuff. But I still have that gap of like, but I still want to be contributing and growing as a software engineer. And I found myself asking the question in January, like, could I grow as a software engineer on an open source project without being, you know, someone's full-time suite? And so, you know, something like this comes up, or even, you know, as we mentioned, some folks might have gone through layoffs recently and things of that nature. You know, you want to keep leveling up your skills as a software engineer, no matter whether you're junior, senior, staff level, it doesn't matter. Because, you know, you start to get rusty after a while, and, you know, new technologies come in, and especially for me teaching a lot, sometimes it's like, I know theoretically how this is supposed to work, but it's different when you got something in prod. Like, it's just different types of issues you face. So, you know, I think it's great that we have this opportunity. I hope that folks will look at not just the short-term opportunities that we have here, but like you said, long-term. If you're new to programming, new to development, this is a great opportunity to see something that's going to be used in production, used at scale, and what are the additional challenges that you face when you're going to, you know, handle software at that capacity, and grow out your skill set. Or maybe you are like, you know, like me, maybe I do content a lot, and now I'm kind of rusty on, you know, software, and I want to keep growing my skills. You know, I can sign up. And so what we have been doing, again, we're going to kind of get into this as we wrap up today, is just thinking about how do we bring the mission that we have at Grow Develop It together with Lasagna Love, and knowing that this new open source project is coming out. So I think I saw a couple of general questions in the chat that were more so answered, which was, I did want to speak to this. So someone mentioned, do people need to be near Lasagna Love? Like, is it like a hand delivery type of service? Yes. So there, the representation is across all states. And so, you know, no matter where you are, you can go ahead and fill out some information, and then get matched with somebody that's local to you. So it's really interesting how much has been done over the last 3 years, and how massive it is. And I hadn't heard of Lasagna Love until we were starting to talk about this. So I was like, Mom, Auntie, like, you guys like to cook, you like doing stuff for people, you should sign up as a volunteer. They will make lasagnas in a second. But there is the developer side of it. So that's what I want to make sure that everyone has access to and understands. And if there's any questions there. So as you all mentioned, there was a sign up sheet to get involved. I think that has been dropped into the chat for the Zoom meeting and can be shared with follow-up folks as well. And then we have some specific events that we have planned out for this month for Grow Development. And so, of course, we're kicking off with the panel today, but we also have some Git and GitHub workshops that will help you really level up your skills if open source is new to you. If you have any concerns around using Git and GitHub, or you're still leveling up your skills there. And so the next workshop that we're going to have will be a 2-part workshop on Git, GitHub, and the terminal. So we will be learning like some basic terminal or command line tools that we need in order to interact with GitHub repositories, making sure our local environments are set up, and just kind of learning how to use Git and GitHub effectively for our own individual projects and projects that we have direct access to. So that is the intro to Git, GitHub, and the terminal, which is going to be on March 21st and March 23rd. And to follow that up, we have a separate session. It is a follow-up session, but for folks that already have experience with Git and GitHub, then maybe you don't need to start there. You can jump in when we talk about how to contribute to open source with Git and GitHub. So on March 28th, we are going to have a session that is just specifically, if you already have experience with Git and GitHub, or you've already taken the previous workshop, how do you use Git and GitHub to contribute to somebody else's repository, right? And so for me, that's what sticks out to me, because I remember that was where I had so many issues when I was first trying to contribute. It's different, the skills that you need to know through version control in order to keep in sync with another repository, and in order to clean up your contributions so that they can be accepted and you get your pull request over that final little hurdle. So those are the 2 technical workshops that we're going to be doing this month, and you all can get involved in those. And then we will have a mini setup day for the hackathon. So I will be available for a mini session on March 30th. And what I really wanted to do is just, as you heard Emma said, she just got the GitHub repo set up and they're working those things out. So I want to have some dedicated time where if you want some support on making sure you have the Project Ricotta set up and you have your dev flow ready to go for the hackathon, we'll just kind of have a little lab session for that. So that's going to be on March 30th. And then our Project Ricotta hackathon is going to be the last weekend of this month. So we're going to start on March 31st. And I don't know if any of you have any points you want to add as far as how Lasagna Love folks will be getting involved with those that are participating in the hackathon. But again, for the last weekend of the month, we're going to have that dedicated time where you can pick up a ticket, work on your contribution, have some support in getting your contribution and your PR submitted. And then hopefully by April, you would actually have, a contribution that's been accepted and is live into the Project Ricotta. And that would be something that, you can showcase on your portfolio as well. I think the different workshops are all being posted into the channel. Any insights on programming languages that will be used?
We haven't decided that. So the open decisions are around programming languages, what we're going to do about our databases, our database approach. This really is at grassroots. And so if somebody wants to be a maintainer and help make some of those decisions right now, feel free to raise your hand. We'll pull you into the Slack channel and you can participate in making those decisions with us.
Awesome. And to that point, I would love to, we have, just a few more minutes. I would love to give any insights on, particular skill sets, what type of folks you think might be interested in this project, right? Like, I think that I've heard, of having like a mobile app and things of that nature. So what are some of the different engineering or software engineering disciplines?
Sure. So we're building a front end app, our web app, and we're building one for donors to be able to make a request, and recipients to be able to, or chefs and recipients to be able to come in. Chefs have their experience from the chef perspective. How do you sign up as a chef? How do you check and see whether you have an order that's come your way? How do you see the tally of all the lasagnas you delivered so far? So there's the chef experience, and then there's the recipient experience. How do you request a lasagna? How do you see when your order's coming through? How do you communicate with your chef? And that chef experience is going to have a set of web apps, and then iOS and also Android. So there's room for front-end devs for iOS, Android, and our web apps. We're then building the database and the matching engine. And we're also, Lasagna Love is a very data-driven organization. So we're building up that competence around managing our experience via data, like understanding, is the rise in the price of ingredients for lasagnas going to affect the number of chefs that we have available? And if so, what can we do about that? So there's a lot of interesting data questions to be answered. So we're building up a data team and a data science team, and also the data engineering team to support that data science team. And then we're looking to have a set of people who are building out the developer tools experience. Emma's leading that. So the developer tools experience, and then the infrastructure and the SRE teams as well.
So a full project, come on.
Oh, literally any skills.
Oh, really important. The designers. So we're looking for designers as well. So if you've ever thought, wow, I really wish that I could have been the person to architect our design system, now is your chance. So this is really an opportunity for people to just get involved on the ground up and have a lot of input.
Yes, Gloria says there really is something for everyone. We are like approaching our last minute, but I just appreciate everybody for being here. I hope that we were able to cover, enough information for you all just to get an idea of, not just open source, like I said, but how you can get involved in this project. And it was really, really important for us to make, I think, when people come to GDI, a lot of times this is my first, right? We have the hackathon, our big hackathon that we do at the end of the year already. And most of the time, like over 90% of the people that attend the hackathon, it's their first hackathon ever. And we've seen amazing projects, right? And we're trying to do more of those first, like just be able to bridge the gap. And so this is a perfect time to say, if you wanted that first open source contribution, of course it can be interesting and daunting and intimidating a lot of times, but we have the support system, we have the folks the great community and the great project for y'all to contribute to. So, that's really our theme for this month. And then hopefully you all would, decide if this is a project that you would like to continue on with as well. But I wanted to give you all, the panelists, if there's any last thoughts or words that you feel like you wanted to share with the group that we have here tonight or this evening, and then we can wrap it up.
We've really tried to chunk out the work to take into account the idea that we're going to have a distributed team and that people are going to onboard and offboard. So don't be intimidated and feel like, oh my gosh, I can only do this if I can do this for the next 6 to 12 months. As we structure the tickets, feel free to take a look, and we're going to try and make them small enough so that you can just do something really small and test it out. And then maybe onboard again to pick up another small ticket in 3 months, or you can just stick around and, work on it for months back to back to back too.
Especially with like the hours for the week. I know some people are like, I only have a couple hours to contribute to this every week. Anything is welcome. And as much time as you have to be able to contribute, it's good for all of us.
And we're structuring our open office hours to lean toward weekends and evenings just to make it easier for people.
Yeah, I think that this is a great opportunity, whether you are experienced with open source projects, we'd love to have you, but even if you're not experienced with them as well, I think it's a really great opportunity to kind of first take that first step. And I think that the workshops planned throughout this next month or so really help you kind of take those steps to get started. That can be sometimes difficult to figure out on your own, but it's kind of structured in a way to really ease that transition to get involved with this project.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, this is like just the kickoff, but also I just appreciate, behind the scenes, how much work is going into making this opportunity a reality. I'm so freaking excited. Like, y'all probably don't even know. And I don't get excited about a lot of stuff. I get excited about GDI. So we will be picking up with our next workshops, which are on our schedule. We've dropped a lot of those links there. And feel free to reach out if you all have any other questions. But for that, I will say we could go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you again, Amy, Erin, Emma. I really, really appreciate you all having some time, and we'll see everybody in like the next workshops.